Hey, I'm Dale North. I'm a composer for video games, and that's it.
So Dale, you've had kind of an amazing journey. Talk about how you ended up composing music for video games.
I, out of school, I started doing this, and I went to my first couple of E3s as a low-level underling and working for other composers. And then I got really scared and I gave up. And when I gave up, I worked in other respects in the industry, and probably for too long, maybe 10 years. And then after about 10 years of that, I decided, that it was more than enough time for me to not be doing what I originally set out to do. So I got back to it, and it was a little bit of a slow start, but now it's going pretty well.
So where do you draw inspiration from when you are making music for games? You take the genre, art design, into account?
I really want the developer of the game to tell me what they want, and sometimes that's kind of hard. It's in video games, it's so easy to look at something else that currently exists, and then you want to make something along those lines. For me, it's like, let's really dig down into what you want as a person, and I try to figure that out for you. So it's more that I take inspiration from the other creators if I can. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but if there's ever opportunity to have a creator tell me what they really want, then that inspires me like crazy. So that's what I try to do, at least.
Do you have like a favorite go-to type of theme or sound you would like to label yourself with?
I'm a real sucker for piano and strings and woodwinds and stuff that's really organic and flowing. Of course, that doesn't work with every game. It's more of a big budget sound. It's kind of a weird juxtaposition to have that really lush, produced, kind of flowing, smooth sound for an indie game. But I really like doing it, and it seems that when I am able to do that for others, they enjoy it as well. So. Again, you can't do that every time, and it could be chiptune, it could be like a brass band. I'm literally doing brass band music for something currently, but it's people always ask, what kind of music do you make? And I say, I make the music that they want. I make the music that they pay me for, so it's like, a lot of times you have to figure out how to make that music. I remember early on in my career when I was trying to get started, I was working on a lot of mobile games, and mobile games are really interesting in that they have a lot of very specific musical needs, and so you'll write genres that you've never written before. And that was actually really excellent practice for me. It was like, how do I write samba? I have no idea. What's a guitarrone? I have classical music training, but I didn't know the guitarrone was a humongous mega-sized bass guitar. But then you write for these things and you learn, and the next time it comes along, you just I know exactly how to do that. So,
So you've been in this industry for a long time. What's it been like seeing the tools for composers evolve, over these last 10, 15 years?
It's crazy because there was a time where it was just your computer and just a specific type of circuitry, and you had to be somewhat of a specialist to make music for those old consoles. Then it exploded up almost to a Hollywood cinematic point where you would record things. And it transitioned really quick from being a small sound to being a big sound. And now it's kind of an open space where anyone can do anything. Technology has it to where literally an iPad and a USB device will let you do anything you need to do. You could and I've done it. I've delivered music I've written on my phone. It doesn't mean that you should, and it doesn't necessarily mean that's the most professional way, but it opens a door that anyone could write video game music if they wanted, and there's really no barrier. So I think the challenge these days is figuring out how you're going to use these and other tools and expertise and training to figure out how to express yourself and make your own music. And it's really interesting here lately because there's kind of a base tool that's available to everyone. Doesn't mean that you'll get the best out of it. So.
You and I are from that generation. I remember MIDIs on the internet, where that's how you used to write music because waves were too big.
Right. The project that's in the forefront right now is an entire soundtrack that I'm doing 100% in MIDI, which is really, really risky in a day where even indie game soundtracks have very large budgets, especially ones that are funded or backed by other companies, or ones that raise a lot of money. Sometimes they'll have tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to record an orchestra or, hire these great players. A lot of my friends and peers, they do television and other work, so they bring the expertise to these indie games, and they sound fantastic. So to get back to the era where you're talking about, where it's just flat MIDI, is really strange. I was adamant, and I came to the developer and I said, I have this idea. And I knew, because we both love the GameCube, right?
Yeah.
And the GameCube had a very specific, dry, crunchy, unaffected sound that is just so charming. There's just something to it. So not for the sake of being retro, but really to honor the game and kind of bring out, their desires. I was like, I just kind of want to do a MIDI soundtrack. And it was a little rough going, but after we got into it, they really started to take to, I really I had to bring it, because there's no production techniques, there's no fancy recordings, it's just raw sound. And they took to it after a while, and that helped me take to it, and the soundtrack has since exploded. And we're just wrapping it up now, like this week.
So as a professional composer, what tools do you use?
It's funny, because I spout all this big talk about not needing the tools, and you really can just write with MIDI and deliver a video game soundtrack. But I've always been a gear nerd. I've been since I grew up in Tokyo, and just going to the magazine store and flipping open music magazines and seeing all the gear. Gear Lust was installed early on. So I have 15 synthesizers, a lot of vintage stuff, a ton of rat gear. To be honest, I don't really use most of that for video game music. Getting back to what I said about the iPad, you can write all this music on an iPad. So for me, it's what do I have that helps me deliver what they want or need? I did Wizard of Legend last year, and that game had a very specific sound and need. I wanted it to sound like a Sega Saturn. And Sega Saturn, given the 90s eras, I had a whole bunch of 90s synthesizers, so it was perfect. But those are completely useless in everything that I'm doing now. So the gear doesn't really matter as much. It's more what you can bring to it as a creator.
I suppose if you want a more a real sound other than a synthetic sound through a keyboard, module mod, you could. That's how you would want to do it.
These days, most people tend to use sample libraries because they're very high quality recordings of actual sounds, gigabytes of just beautifully recorded sounds in actual venues that are world famous for recording film scores, TV scores. It's a little bit too easy, but if you're creative with those, you can be creative with that. You can be creative with MIDI. You can be creative as a woodwind player. It doesn't really matter so much. The only thing that matters is that you're bringing something of yours or someone else's inspiration to it. So
what advice would you give to kids out there that want to make video game music or just music in general?
I'm probably not. Well, given that I gave up, I think my key thing would be to not, because I did. I literally just said I can't do this. It was too scary for me, and so I wasted a lot of time. I wasted so much time that I regret it. And it wasn't necessarily a waste from a life standpoint, but it was definitely from a career standpoint. I watched my peers, people that I came up with, people that I schooled with, people that I learned with. I watched them just do everything that I wanted to do, and it was really tough. It was really tough in seeing my dream played out in someone else's hands. So it's the cheesiest thing in the world, but I would say not to give up, because those opportunities that I was able to capitalize on many years later, they were actually there from the beginning. And I may be a different person, I may have grown or learned more, but I could have just as easily stuck with it and eventually worked my way into the same opportunities. So to me, that's a bigger thing than any other kind of musical training or gear advice or anything. It's like, don't waste the time. You only have so much, so kind of make it count.
And where can people go to support you and your music?
It's, indie games are cool in that they're on every platform. So dalenorthmusic.com is regularly updated with what I'm working on. It's a weird period where I had some games come out and then you just work on them. You work on them for a couple of years and then they come out. And so there's fixing to be a really nice steady release of a whole bunch of titles that I've been working on over the next year or so, starting late this summer. So that'll be updated. My Twitter @DaleNorth, same thing.